All right, today we're diving into a really tough but incredibly important book, Linda Pullman's The Crisis Caravan. It's a hard look at the world of humanitarian aid. You know, it's an industry that's built on our absolute best intentions, but Pullman forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. What happens when all that good intention actually backfires?
So let's just get right to the heart of it, right? The big, provocative question that drives this whole thing. What if the act of helping, of rushing into these crisis zones with food and medicine, what if it doesn't just fail to fix the problem, but actually makes things worse? It's a shocking thought, and it's exactly what we're going to explore.
But before we get into the problems, we really have to understand the ideal. Where did all this come from? You know, the humanitarian movement wasn't dreamed up in some boardroom. It was born from a very powerful, very real human feeling, the impulse to help someone who's suffering. I love this quote from Henri Dunant, the guy who founded the Red Cross. He called it a positive craving. Think about that. It's not just a duty, it's a hunger, an energy that just compels you to act. That's the pure, raw motivation that started this whole movement.
And it all started here. Picture this, it's 1859. A Swiss businessman, Henri Dunant, just happens upon the aftermath of this horrific battle in Italy. And he sees thousands upon thousands of soldiers from both sides just left to bleed out and die on the field. They're totally abandoned. He's horrified, so he does something incredible. He rallies the local townspeople, mostly women, with this one simple, powerful idea. Tutti fratelli, we are all brothers. It doesn't matter what uniform you're wearing, if you're wounded, you get help. And boom, right there, that's the birth of the Red Cross.
But here's where things get complicated really fast. Because right from the very beginning, like literally from day one, a massive ethical debate popped up that has haunted the aid world ever since. See, not everyone thought this idea of help, no matter what, was the right call.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got Dunant. For him, it was simple. You have a duty to relieve suffering. End of story. But on the other side was Florence Nightingale, and she had a huge problem with this. She basically said, hold on a minute. If you rush in with volunteers to patch up soldiers and feed people, you're making war cheaper for governments. You're taking on the costs, which just makes it easier for them to keep fighting. So Dunant wanted to treat the wound right now. Nightingale wanted to stop the war that was causing the wounds in the first place. This clash of ideas is, honestly, the central drama we're still dealing with today.
Okay, so let's fast forward from that 19th century battlefield debate to today. Because that pure, simple impulse to help, well, it's ballooned into something massive, incredibly complex, and fiercely competitive. It's not just a mission anymore, folks. It's a global industry. Just look at this number, $120 billion. According to Pullman's research, that's a rough estimate of what the humanitarian aid sector is worth annually. That is a staggering amount of money flying around the planet from one crisis to the next.
And who's chasing that money? Well, this is the estimated number of non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, all competing for a slice of that $120 billion pie. 37,000 organizations making up this giant crisis caravan.
So what's driving this whole machine? Pullman has this perfect term for it: contract fever. Basically, aid agencies live and die by the funding contracts they get from donor governments. This creates this insane pressure to be everywhere, to be seen at every disaster, to plant your flag and secure the funding. Because if you don't, another NGO will, and that means your own organization might go under. And that fear, that pressure, can push organizations to make some really, really questionable choices. And there is no better example of where these choices can lead than the refugee camps in Goma in the mid-1990s. This is the case study that just rips the lid off the dark side of the aid system. It's a tough one.
This quote says it all. It's from Fiona Terry, who worked for Doctors Without Borders and was there on the ground. She called it a total ethical disaster. And she wasn't talking about a lack of supplies or bad planning. She was talking about a complete and utter moral collapse.
So here's what happened. After the Rwandan genocide in 1994, hundreds of thousands of Hutus fled across the border into Goma. But here's the crucial part. Mixed in with the civilians were thousands of the killers themselves, the génocidaires. Then a massive cholera outbreak hit the camps. The world's aid agencies rushed in to help, but in their race to save the victims of cholera, they ended up providing food, shelter, and medical care to the very people who had just committed one of the worst mass murders of the 20th century.
And what happened next was just surreal. The aid money didn't just provide relief. It actually created a thriving war economy. The extremist Hutu government leaders were literally running their operations from poolside hotels just outside the camps.
inside the camps, militias took control. They set up cinemas, restaurants, even discos. They charged aid workers taxes, stole aid to fund deadly raids back into Rwanda, and brutally murdered anyone in the camps who dared to speak out. The humanitarian camps had become fully supplied military bases, paid for by the international community.
This story from the book is absolutely bone-chilling. It just perfectly captures the total lack of accountability. A UN policeman in the camp asks a man point-blank, "Did you participate in the genocide?" The man just casually says, "Oui, yes." And when the policeman asks him why, he just shrugs and says, "Just because." The killers were living right alongside the aid workers who are keeping them alive, with zero consequences.
And you have to understand, Goma wasn't some tragic one-off event. This manipulation of humanitarian aid is a recurring tactic in modern wars. It's a systemic problem, not an isolated one.
Pullman even has a name for this strategy: refugee warriors. It's a deliberate military tactic. Armed groups hide themselves among innocent civilians in refugee camps. And why wouldn't they? The camps give them protection from attack, free food, free healthcare, and a whole population they can control, tax, and recruit from. They basically become the perfect R&R spot for armies.
And this has been happening for decades. You can see the pattern. In the 60s, food aid helped prolong the Biafran War. In the 80s, the genocidal Khmer Rouge literally rebuilt their forces inside UN-run camps in Thailand. In the 90s, in Bosnia, aid convoys were just seen as mobile grocery stores for warring armies to loot. And for years in Sudan, the government has weaponized food, controlling exactly who gets to eat and who is left to starve. The playbook is depressingly consistent.
This quote, "This one is just devastating." It comes from a Bosnian civilian talking to an aid worker, and it cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? It shows how, from a victim's perspective, aid that doesn't actually stop the violence can feel like it's just prolonging the agony. It keeps you alive, sure, but you're still trapped in the same nightmare. So, all of this brings us right back to where we began, back to that original fight between Dunant and Nightingale. And it brings us to the one question that it seems the entire aid industry is terrified to ask itself out loud.
Here we are, over 150 years later, and we are still stuck on the horns of this exact same dilemma. Do you follow Dunant's path, that absolute unconditional duty to help no matter what? Or do you listen to Nightingale's warning, that your help, your good intentions, can be twisted and used as a weapon to create even more suffering?
Linda Pullman's work doesn't give us any easy answers, because there aren't any. Instead, it leaves us staring at this incredibly powerful and uncomfortable question. In the messy, brutal reality of a war zone, where good intentions can literally fuel the war machine, at what point does the act of helping cross a line and become unethical? It's a question we absolutely have to keep asking.